The following video contains repeated references to a shocking Old Testament sex story that ended with a guy prematurely dying. As if that weren't disappointing enough, the video then becomes fixated on masturbation. Thankfully, the host uses only appropriate clinical language for this practice and at no point employs any of those juvenile slang phrases for masturbation, like barking at the wood waffle, refilling the swamp stapler, or soldiering through the long Russian winter with Napoleon, all of which are offensive and have no place on the internet. Parents are therefore encouraged to withhold this content from Bible-curious young people.
Here's a sensitive, super honest question. Does the Bible say masturbation is a sin? Lots of people have asked this question for many, many years, and there's a very simple, straightforward answer. No. Not only does the Bible not say it's a sin, it doesn't say anything about it. It doesn't mention masturbation by name, and it doesn't describe masturbation as a practice. And sometimes, with the Bible, you're like, well, the Bible couldn't have anticipated how things would turn out to be because it's such an old book and technology has changed. Look, all the technology that was needed to masturbate was in place at the time the Bible was written. It had 66 books worth of opportunity to speak to it, and it didn't. Now, that is not to say that the Bible is mute on the subject of sex. It's got a ton to say about sex and sexuality and the thought life that goes along with it. And it's enormously positive, interesting, compelling stuff that you can read and decide to do with whatever you decide you need to do with it. But to the question of the physical act of masturbation, that's really simple. It just ain't in there. Now, there is this one passage, though, that people from time to time will try to shoehorn masturbation into, and it's Genesis chapter 38, a bizarro story about a guy named Judah and his family and weird sex stuff that happens. So I'm going to put that up on the screen right now. Pause, read that real quick, and then we're going to come back and talk about it. You've got this guy, Judah, who is the son of this guy Jacob, who is the son of this guy Isaac, who is the son of this guy Abraham. And Abraham's important because God made a special promise to Abraham in the book of Genesis that said, you're going to have a ton of descendants and you're going to be a great nation, and I'm going to bless all the nations of the whole world through your descendants. Now, what does that mean? Maybe that comes into focus later. This guy Judah, who's an overwhelmingly unremarkable character in the Bible in terms of what he did, but very remarkable in terms of where he fits in the family tree. He's got some sons. His firstborn son gets killed by God. Don't know why. If the Bible wanted us to know, I guess it would have spelled it out. So verse 8, then Judah said to Onan, so this is kid number 2, so dad is saying to son number 2, lie with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to produce offspring for your brother. This is not a duty that we have anymore. This is an old duty, and it is one that's called Levirate Marriage. And maybe I'm saying that right. And Levirate Marriage is a cultural tradition that even predates the Bible. And we know this because God doesn't ordain Levirate Marriage until somewhere over here, like in Deuteronomy or something, I think. So this cultural expectation is placed upon Onan by his dad and his family to say, give your dead brother's wife an offspring. Now, today, I don't know if that happened in your family. I think probably you'd just live with it, and it'd be sad that your dead brother didn't have any offspring, but you're just gonna have to roll with that because we don't do like plural marriage. It's like generally really hard on Thanksgiving celebrations to go around having sex with in-laws and widows and things like that. It's a terrible idea. But back then, this was a gesture of honor. It was a gesture of not just respect to your dead family member, but also respect to your family household in general. And here's why. Back then, you had a system where, and this word I understand can trigger people, there was a patriarchy. Not like we think of patriarchy now, but there was a head of an entire household. And this was the societal base structural unit. And so the patriarch was the guy who was the father of all the kids who were married to people who had grandkids, and he technically owned all the property and the household, and everybody lived in one big household or traveling caravan together. And the first generation of kids might have say and input, but that patriarch owns everything and is the decider of where this family is headed. So it's a pretty important position because it's representative of, frankly, a ton of people and a ton of stuff. Well, is supposed to have a kid who will inherit that household when Judah dies. And it's little brother's job to fulfill that duty. Well, not surprisingly, little brother isn't very interested in that, because if little brother doesn't make babies with Tamar, then little brother gets to assume the head honcho position when Judah, the current patriarch, dies. So verse 9, but Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, so whenever he lay with his brother's wife, he spilled his seed. Thanks, Bible. On the ground to keep from producing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so he put him to death also. All right. And there's more here in just a minute. The deal is that apparently some primitive form of birth control was being practiced here. Back in the day, I mean, you don't need better. I don't know what you're going to put on there to keep that from working. I don't know if they have some kind of primitive prophylactic that you could use, maybe made out of like some kind of goat bladder, something like that. But apparently he wasn't aware of this, if this was a thing at the time, and so he just wings it, and this semen just ends up all over the place, right? Now some people read this passage and they're like, hey, that is basically the same thing as masturbation, because anytime that the precious life-giving fluid that is semen is not put straight into some woman, that is using it wrong, and this is an abomination before the Lord because of this passage. So some will read this and say that verse 10, what he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, is referring to having semen land somewhere other than in a woman. Now, the problem with that is the text doesn't say it, and further the problem with that is I think if God were going to kill every dude who ever had his seed spill somewhere other than into a woman, we wouldn't have dudes anymore. So this does not add up to me. Now, there's a lot of theories here as to what actually went wrong. Was it that he just disobeyed God? But again, lots of people disobey God and they don't end up dead in the Bible. In fact, everybody disobeys God except Jesus in the Bible. And so, no, it doesn't seem right. Was it that he was being selfish and didn't want to provide an heir and that's what it was about? Well, I mean, it looks like that's what the problem was, but probably lots of people did that too. So that probably isn't it. Is it that it was birth control? Well, there's other stuff in the Bible. This is don't do the birth control thing. And even though there are some prominent expressions of Christianity that hold that birth control is something you shouldn't do, it's not because it's in the Bible. I mean, this is your strongest case. You got to do better than that. Is it because this is like masturbation somehow? Because like he was having sex with the lady, but then at the last minute real quick, he was like, no, I'm not surprised. This is masturbating. Ha 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 ha. Gotcha. Well, it doesn't really make a lot of sense either. And if that's how you masturbate, that's a really weird. So if it's not masturbation, it's not birth control, and it's not just being generally misbehaving, naughty jerk who disobeys God, what is it? I think to get that answer, you have got to go so much further out into the realm of context, but when you do, it becomes crystal clear. Remember a little while ago, I talked about this family tree that starts with Abraham. Well, this Abraham guy, a little bit earlier in the book of Genesis, God picks out of nowhere as being the guy he's going to make a promise to. He makes his promise to Abraham that says, you're going to have all these descendants, and the key part here is that all the nations of the world are going to be blessed through these descendants. And it's the first hint that something redemptive is coming. Someone redemptive is coming down the road. And we start to see these hints all over the Old Testament. And every time we see one of these hints about the redemptive work of God and the completion of God's redemptive project to fix everything that's messed up and ruined and gross about the world, it all flows out of this line, this family tree of Abraham. So Abraham has his kid Isaac. Isaac has his kid Jacob. Jacob has these kids, and one of them is Judah. And we keep singling in on one little branch of the family tree. And out of Judah come all of these other descendants that lead us all the way down to this other really prominent character in the Old Testament named King David, second king of the Jewish monarchy. And God picks David out and makes another promise to him. And this promise is that there's going to be this eternal kingdom with an eternal king that's going to sit on the throne, and all of these promises of blessing and redemption are going to be connected to this king that's coming as well. So you've got, in this seemingly disparate story of the Old Testament, a really clean narrative flow that weaves right through it with the descendants of Abraham through Isaac, Jacob, and Judah that points toward somebody who's coming down the road. Well, you don't have to be a Christian to know that the somebody I'm talking about is Jesus. And Jesus is the fulfillment of like gazillions of things in the Old Testament that point toward him. And the question about Onan really comes into focus when you go to the very first verse of the New Testament. That's the new half of the Bible that talks about what the deal was with Jesus and the people who followed him and where everything's going now with God's redemptive plan. So we get to literally the New Testament, verse number 1, reading forward. A record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. So Perez is the kid that Judah and Tamar have out of that weird relationship. And we follow it all the way down, and all these other people and all these other names. David's in there and everything. And Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. Onan, maybe without even really having any clue that this was the deal, got really close to that center streak of God's redemptive plan for all of human history that's outlined in the Bible. And he didn't want to do his part. He was messing with the line of Judah, the line of Abraham, the line that would produce Christ, out of whom all of the fulfillment and completion would come. Maybe it's not a big deal to you or me who your dad was, who your granddad was, but it was a big deal to people at this time who you were descended from. And Jesus being able to demonstrate that connection back through David and all of the patriarchs was absolutely crucial for people recognizing him for who he was, the Messiah. Onan was playing with fire, and what we see here is not God's anger at things that vaguely possibly resemble something that could be construed as masturbation and how much he wants to kill people who do that. What we see instead is God's zeal, his refusal to let his redemptive plan to take that which is broken about this world and fix it be thwarted by anybody for any reason whatsoever. Bottom line, the Bible does not expressly forbid the physical act of masturbation because it doesn't talk about masturbation anywhere. Bottom line number 2, the Bible does have a lot to say about sex, sexuality, and what goes on inside your brain, and you can read that stuff and take it into account when you decide what you will or won't do with your body in this regard. Bottom line number 3, that Genesis 38 passage, it's not about masturbation. Stop it. Finally, I want to thank my friend Lindsey Doe, who runs a very different channel from mine called Sexplanations. We were at a conference together and got into a long talk about Onan and masturbation and all of this stuff, and it was super fun to compare notes to somebody who's coming at this question from a different angle, teaching different content. And so we got to talking and decided we were going to collaborate on this and put this video out at the same time as the other put out their corresponding video on the same topic. So Sexplanations is her channel. I've got a link to that down in the comments. Go and check out her read on this thing and stretch your brain, see where she's coming from. Huge appreciation for Lindsey for being a part of this thing and collaborating with me and raising the question in my brain. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour. Thanks for kicking around something weird with me. See you soon.